You probably have a sense that the challenges you experience with food have their root in trauma and accumulated stress. In this video, I'll help you understand more about that connection and how you can begin to overcome those unwanted patterns with food. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Lori Montre. I'm a trauma-informed eating psychology coach. I help you understand why you have certain patterns with food and how to apply the latest research in behavior change, neuroplasticity, and trauma healing to get free. Now, this video is a little longer than my typical YouTube, but I invite you to take the time to watch it because this information is absolutely essential for you to be able to overcome those unwanted patterns with food. Now, this topic doesn't fit neatly into a 10-minute video, but you're worth taking the time to watch it. So with that in mind, let's start with a little background on trauma. Traditionally, we're taught that trauma is experienced with catastrophic events like living through a natural disaster, living in a war zone, being a victim of sexual, physical, or emotional abuse. And while trauma can and often does result from these horrific experiences, it certainly is not limited to these types of events. Both the sources and the consequences of trauma are wide-ranging and often hidden from our awareness. Most of us have been traumatized in one way or another, not just victims or soldiers. So I'd like to begin our discussion today by just asking you to give up any preconceived notions about what trauma is. The definition is much broader than you may currently be thinking. Now, the simplest definition I can provide of what trauma is that it is something that overwhelms the nervous system of the individual beyond what it can handle in that moment. So obviously, for different people, it will look vastly different. What is traumatic to me may not be to another, depending on a lot of factors. Trauma is also not necessarily one thing. Events and experiences build over time, and that's why two people can experience the exact same thing in one moment, and one be deeply affected and the other not. It's also why from the outside, we can never decide what registers for someone else as a trauma. Now, while there are other types, most trauma will fall into one of three categories. And the first is shock trauma. That could be something like a car accident, a biking, skiing, boating accident, things like that, bad falls. And this category could also include natural disasters like hurricanes or earthquakes, as well as physical, sexual, and even verbal abuse. The second kind is accumulated stress. Now, this is tricky because most people think that our push and grind of this industrialized modern world is just normal. But in fact, we go through our day-to-day lives accumulating stress due to our work environment, not enough downtime, financial worries. We had the pandemic concerns, world events, politics, racism, our children or parents to take care of, our health issues, their health issues, right? And combined all of this accumulated stress with our ever nutritionally depleted food supply, not getting enough sleep, living in an environment full of toxins, right? And this often becomes more than our systems can handle. It becomes a trauma. Now, the fact is, as there's a lot of things that are pushing and pulling on you every day, and there has been for a long time. Dr. Gabor Mate's latest book, The Myth of Normal, is a really fascinating look at how modern life is impacting us on all levels of our being. And I'll also mention here that the challenges that you have faced with food and your body are another form of trauma. In fact, something called post-traumatic dieting disorder is now being recognized and studied as a condition that millions are struggling with. Being in that constant state of worry, struggle, despair about your body, your food choices, whether you're being good or bad, restricting food at times, all of this can easily overwhelm a system and leave a lasting impression. Now, the last kind of trauma that I'll mention today is actually the most common in the industrialized world, and it is early and developmental trauma. This is a big category, so for the sake of simplicity, we'll just describe it as the big and bad, the scary things that happened to us at a young age, including the time we were in utero, or us not getting our needs met, whether they be physical or emotional, enough of the time. Not all the time, but enough of the time. I mean, take, for example, the simple illustration of a mother who's really stressed or experienced a traumatic event while she's pregnant. The child in her womb is also going to experience those stress chemicals, those fears, and those worries. This category of trauma also includes birth trauma, such as being born premature, having to be isolated in an incubator, hooked up to machines, anything where the baby's not able to be held for long periods of time. And of course, ongoing physical, sexual abuse, and other forms of neglect, such as lack of proper nutrition, unfavorable shelter and safety, all those kinds of things are players as well. So developmental trauma also includes not having a secure attachment and healthy attunement from a reliable parent or adult caregiver. Now, the term attachment, it describes how an infant and a caregiver, often but not always the mom, how they're connecting. And there are many types of attachment that an infant will get depending on the health of the parent, their ability to connect and bond. And secure attachment is the most advantageous attachment style for optimal development of the nervous system. And this occurs when the mom or other adult caregiver is there on demand for the baby, when the baby needs soothing, connection, when the baby's hungry, too cold, too hot, and so on. When the baby's physical and emotional needs are getting met in a safe, secure, and loving environment, the baby forms a healthy nervous system. It is through this secure attachment that we learn how to calm and soothe ourselves, first through the actions of another, our caregiver, and then eventually through our own actions. The self-soothing and self-regulating is a learned behavior. It's not something that we're born with, not something that we can do on our own as infants and young children. So not having at least one attuned, healthy caregiver early in life to consistently help us calm and soothe, this creates a high level of survival stress. And this early dysregulation of the nervous system will go on to create physical and emotional difficulties throughout a person's life. So in a nutshell, these are the most common types of trauma. And in reality, we only scratch the surface of this topic. But what is important to take away from this discussion is that almost everyone has experienced one or more of these traumas, these overwhelming experiences in their lifetime. So the chances that you individually have experienced some form of trauma is extremely high. So let's move into understanding, how does trauma affect us? And when a person's system is overwhelmed, there are very real mental, emotional, and physical changes that occur. Trauma leaves an imprint on the person such that they will never be quite the same. When trauma occurs in childhood, such as with the attachment traumas that we discussed, it also affects the very development of the brain. So what we're really talking about here is the changes that occurred and then were carried on in the nervous system as a result of those overwhelming experiences. And I will say too, trauma affects everyone differently. Some individuals clearly display symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder. Many more individuals will have symptoms that don't meet the criteria for PTSD, but nonetheless, these symptoms greatly impact the quality of their lives and their behaviors. Now, I could go on for days about all of the research we have on the effects of trauma, but since we have just a little bit of time here together, I'll just generally say that trauma affects our health, it affects our motivation, our ability to connect and be authentic. It affects, obviously, our relationships, our ability to concentrate, learn, and work, and our ability to make conscious choice, and much more. When we hold on to trauma responses, get stuck in the state that we experienced when the trauma occurred, we live with less access to the more evolved portions of our nervous system, and we suffer the physical, emotional, and mental consequences of that. So with that in mind, I want to share some of the well-understood reactions to trauma. Now, it isn't that every person is going to necessarily experience all of these things, and some of them might be more prominent than others for different individuals. But some of the things that we might notice is disconnection with self in response to trauma, and in coping with the unpleasant feelings, right, that overwhelmed us and that may persist afterwards. Many of us shut down the brain areas, specifically the medial prefrontal activation, that transmit these uncomfortable feelings. What a great idea, right? The problem is that those brain areas are responsible for registering the emotions and sensations that make us who we are. So in an effort to shut down or shut off terrifying or those particularly intense sensations, we deaden the capacity to feel many of our emotions. And this shutting down is thought to be the reason why many traumatized people lose their sense of purpose and direction. Furthermore, many traumatized people are unable to describe what they're feeling because they can't identify what their physical sensations mean. For example, they may look angry, but say they're just fine because they aren't able to discern what's going on inside their bodies, right? They may have shut that down because it was too much for them to handle at a time they didn't have the skills or the capability to deal with it. They also tend to be out of touch with their needs and may not take care of themselves in certain ways. They may fail to set boundaries with others or simply not know how to help themselves feel safe. How does this relate to your relationship with food? Well, being disconnected from self, from feelings, from body sensations and needs means that you may struggle to know when you're physically hungry or full. Also, if you're unaware of what you're needing, you might turn to food to feel cared for when the exact need isn't known and you can't provide for it for that reason. The second effect of trauma is that it makes it very difficult for us to tolerate our emotions. And this is especially true with emotions like anger, anxiety, sadness, and shame. Naturally, it's very overwhelming to live in a state where you're unable to allow in and process difficult emotions because emotions come whether we want them or not. So how does this one relate to your relationship with food? Not being able to tolerate emotions sets you up for addictions to help you stuff down your emotions, to numb yourself and generally cope with feelings. This is one of the main reasons that alcohol, nicotine, food, shopping, drugs, sex, the internet, gambling, work, all of it are much more likely to be used in addictive ways by people who've experienced trauma. Now, the third way that we might see trauma showing up is in the nervous system. The nervous system of people who have experienced trauma spend a lot more time in survival mode. Their brains develop to help them survive by keeping them hypervigilant to their surroundings, ready to react to threats very quickly. And it makes sense, right? So you may feel like you're on high alert all the time. Many people assume that they have a condition like ADHD, but in reality, they have a nervous system that's cued to be constantly scanning for threat and hyper attuned to their surroundings. Now, being on high alert a lot of the time has a lot of implications. If you're on high alert, you're not in that rest and digest parasympathetic state where optimal healing and regeneration can happen. So as a result, trauma leads to chronic illnesses and other health concerns. Among the list are, fibromyalgia, chronic pain, irritable bowel, Crohn's disease, all kinds of autoimmune conditions, migraines, severe PMS, chronic pain, chronic anxiety and depression are also put in this category of illness. And how does this impact your relationship with food? Well, first of all, illnesses of the body make it all the more difficult to stop using food when it's such a quick and easy way to feel a little better, at least in the moment of eating it. It also makes it harder to find the energy to do the kinds of things, right? To take the actions, the meal planning, the prepping, the movement that leads to healthier bodies and choices. And also, being stuck on high alert means that you feel endangered and you're triggered easily and more often. So circumstances, just day-to-day life experiences simply feel bigger, more overwhelming to a person whose nervous system is overloaded. You may startle easy. Something relatively small like needing to step on your brakes quickly, that might leave you shaken for a while. And this means that you probably feel the need to comfort, calm, and regulate yourself often. And food is a quick and easy way to do that. The fifth reaction that we see is the brain structures of people with trauma are different in ways that bring challenges in judgment, impulse control, and other higher brain functions. Part of the reason for this is the stress hormones that were present at the time the brain was developing. It actually caused those parts of the brain in charge of higher brain functions to develop in less than optimal ways. So this explains why you know what you want to do and you want to make these different choices, especially with food. But when you're in a triggered moment, it doesn't feel like there is any other choice but to eat the food. And this point is uber important because when your nervous system is on high alert, your survival system is running the show. And this system is only concerned about your survival in the next 2 minutes. It is not concerned about how you're going to feel in an hour. It just wants you alive in an hour. Furthermore, your survival system doesn't have access to your good ideas, your creativity, or your long-term goals. So as long as your survival system is the driver of your bus, you're going to head straight through the drive-through. Without that flexible, active frontal lobe, which is referred to as higher brain, you become a creature of habit. Conscious choice, invention and innovation, discovery and wonder, they're all lacking. And you're stuck going down the same well-worn neural pathway that you've always been down, straight to the kitchen. Contrast that to the times when you might be feeling calm and relaxed. In that state, you have access to the executive capacities of the prefrontal cortex, which enables you to observe what's going on and act in alignment with what you want to be doing instead of what you've always done, right? When you're connected to your higher brain, you're able to navigate triggered moments by staying conscious and saying, oh, I'm feeling triggered or overwhelmed or hopeless and want food to comfort or calm me. Oh, what's the real need here and how can I best meet it? It's your higher brain that's able to put the chip bag back in the pantry or the ice cream scoop back in the drawer and feel empowered instead of ashamed. Now, finally, I'll say that trauma affects how we see the world and our beliefs about the future. There may be a lot of insecurity, a loss of hope, limited expectations about life, or fear that life will end abruptly or early, or anticipation that normal life events won't occur and needs won't be met. A person who is traumatized by abuse, abandonment, or by a disinterested caregiver has been trained to see others and the world as untrustworthy, uninterested, or potentially harmful. It's very common to have feelings of insecurity, shame, guilt, self-doubt, which in turn can lead to a state of depression. It can also lead to feeling bad about yourself in general and make you very critical of your body. Many people who suffered abuse as children have self-esteem problems. This is especially true for people who suffered abuse at the hands of someone that they loved, someone who is a caregiver or supposed to be a caregiver. And the mind, it tries to make sense of the situation, and rather than blaming the grown-up who they look to and rely on for their survival, it feels safer to make ourselves the problem. We make ourselves bad, tell ourselves a story about how the abuse was our fault, and that gives us a degree of power. Because if it's our fault, we can change it by changing ourselves. Similarly, when someone is mistreated, or even if they just felt unloved by a distracted parent, that child will often think that there's something wrong with them and that they're in fact unlovable. How does this affect your relationship with food? Well, these feelings are some of the most difficult to navigate. Feeling unsafe, unlovable, unworthy, it's actually terrifying. Driven into our DNA is the strong desire to fit in. As hunters and gatherers, we would have surely died if we had been kicked out of the tribe. So we strive, even when it doesn't benefit us, to be likable. Feeling unlovable cuts straight to our survival system. And these types of feelings often send us to food for relief, comfort, and distraction. So let me take a moment and just recap the most important points of this video so far. Number one, you have likely experienced events that were overwhelming to your system. Number two, as a result, you feel triggered often. You're more likely to find yourself in situations where you need something, food, to help you cope with life. And number three, you have a little bit harder time with impulse control. Number four, you may have a harder time regulating emotions. Number five, you may have a harder time self-soothing, especially if you had less than optimal attachment as a child. So in short, you find yourself in these triggered, dysregulated, intensely uncomfortable states, which causes you to turn to food as the only thing your brain says is going to help you feel better. Because when you think about it, emotional eating, it makes perfect sense. You have a strong neurological pathway associated with eating to feel better. And when you're triggered, it's almost impossible for your survival brain to make a different choice. Higher brain, however, is capable of soothing, meeting your needs in other ways. But that part of your brain is often not available. So one of the most important keys to overcoming emotional eating is to stop trying to control yourself. Stop beating yourself up and instead work with your nervous system to calm survival brain, regain access to your higher brain, Being stuck in survival as a result of past traumas and accumulated day-to-day stress is why you feel like you're on autopilot. It's why 30 minutes after eating the food, you're sitting back wondering, why the hell did I do that? You feel like you weren't there in that, you weren't the one eating the food because part of you wasn't there. Your higher brain wasn't on board. Now, hearing about the effects of trauma, I understand it might feel really overwhelming or even hopeless, but the good news is you're plastic. You can reteach your nervous system in such a way that you respond to your survival responses, but you don't stay stuck there. And this means coming back to a relaxed state that allows for healing, social connection, and also higher brain functions like creativity, a concern for the future, your good ideas. Right? And being able to deal with triggers and stressors with resiliency is what it means to be well-regulated. And guess what? When you're well-regulated, you don't turn to food for regulation. By learning to heal your nervous system, self-regulate, self-soothe, you'll find that you get triggered a lot less often. And even if you do, your higher brain will be there to help you make a new choice. Healing past traumas and learning to work with your nervous system through practices like somatic experiencing is fundamental in helping you become more resourced and capable, which allows you to overcome emotional eating and other limitations in your life. When you have the tools to see what's happening and regulate your system without the use of food, you don't even think about using food when you're triggered, and that's freedom. When I tell people that they can get to the point where they won't even think about food unless they're feeling physically hungry, they can't imagine it. But when you have the tools that work so much better than food and don't lead to the shame, the digestive issues, the extra weight, you want to use the tools instead. At that point, it's no longer a matter of controlling yourself. It's a matter of making the best choice. Now, I know I've shared a lot of information with you in this video, but I hope you're better able to see the connection between trauma and accumulated stress, your nervous system, and emotional eating. The bottom line is you're not a willpower weakling. You're not addicted to food. With the right education, the right support and guidance, you absolutely can change your relationship with food. Now, if you found this information helpful, I invite you to like and subscribe to the channel because it will help me get similar content to you and to others who need emotional eating support. I also encourage you to download my series of free resources that help you understand the 3 keys that allow you to heal and achieve food and body freedom. You can download these resources using the link just below this video. And as always, I very much look forward to your questions, to your comments, and your insights.